brain is one of the most fascinating things that people have obsessed over for decades on end. This simple organ is responsible for everything we do as a species, and the same for other species. From breathing to processing movements, injuries, emotions, even me writing this script right now is my brain working a mile a minute to make an engaging intro. And now after writing that sentence just now, I know it's now doubting its own ability. This simple organ is fascinating as it is everything that makes us who we are. As the legendary scientist and Dead Space enthusiast Roanoke Gaming says, it is a 3-pound anxiety meat trapped inside its calcium container. But despite that, this organ has gone on to develop us into who we are now. Every technological jump we have made was thanks to electronic signals and chemicals being pumped through and retaining that knowledge. However, at the same time, the brain is a terrifying thing as it can be your worst enemy, making you doubt yourself, making you hate yourself, shutting down some processes to make you forget things and people that you have been with for years, and in the worst case scenario, can make you think that those around you despise you and on some occasions even hate you and want to get rid of you. For the most part, however, these feelings can be rare, and thanks to more communication, we are able to talk things out and help one another out when we feel like that. However, what if an external influence was to get involved and would go on to influence this precious organ stuck in your skull? Well, for the people of the Ishimura and the colony of Aegis 7, as well as Earth and many other places, this would be exactly what happened, as their mental state would be pushed to their limit, driving many insane, causing them to wipe out one another and sometimes even themselves, all thanks to them bringing on board this third party of something that would be known as the red marker. It would become clear that these markers were humanity's biggest threat and needed to be taken out. However, due to how influential they were, most would either end themselves because of their influence or would find themselves indoctrinated and would try and do their bidding. So what are the markers? What influence do they have on our brains? What is their history, and can we come to a conclusion on where they ultimately come from? Well, in today's video, we will be exploring one of the most fascinating things in humanity's existence, looking into the mind-altering obelisk known as the marker. So today's video, this is the story behind the markers and their goals within Dead Space. The origin of the markers is extremely unknown, and it's all down to speculation as to where they come from. It could be that they were made by another being, were the byproduct of a cataclysm out within a galaxy, or are just an evolution of a piece of the ecosystem. These mysterious obelisks, however, are all the same. Being a double helix shape, the original marker was only known as the black marker and was the first thing encountered by a few species, including humanity. With these markers all looking the same, their sole purpose is also the same, as they all go on to broadcast a highly concentrated electromagnetic signal which would cause anyone or most living things in the nearby area to show signs of extreme insomnia, intense depression, and a strong case of dementia, which would go on to cause the person to witness hallucinations of loved ones or events of their past, to make the person fall into a state of paranoia and eventually cause them to carry out homicidal or suicidal actions. This whole process was done by the markers to allow the beings to create bodies so that they could bring about the necromorph process, creating large areas of biomass created from the dead bodies of the area and anything else that could help its growth. The reason for why the marker did this was because it wanted to trigger an event that would be known as the convergence event, and to create a massive terrifying sight that would be known as the Brethren Moon, a giant spacefaring necromorph that would travel through the stars to infect more planets and continue the cycle of creating more necromorphs and biomass for the next Brethren Moon creation. The full process of this starts with the black marker, as it is sent through space to plummet into a hospitable planet's surface, and as soon as it has landed, it will create an electromagnetic signal that would be seen to any species in the nearby area as a source of limitless energy. It is also rumored and speculated by many different people that this original signal helped with speeding up a species' evolutionary cycle, helping helping them to become more sentient and transforming them into beings that can help the black marker replicate its signal and help it out on its ultimate goal. This signal is so powerful when it is first released that it will cause the dominant species of the planet who would go on to find the marker to go on to worship this obelisk, seeing its true limitless power and believing it to be a deity of some kind. And as they would go on to worship this double helix monument, they would be tricked into creating copies of it to spread the signal further. With this, the dominant species would go on to create their own version of the black marker, covering it in symbols, and would go on to name it as the red marker, as it gave off a blood red glow for all to see. In the mind of the species creating this copy, they believed it allowed them to gain more resources and power throughout all of the land. But little did they know that they were in fact being indoctrinated by it to help spread the signal further for the contagion that was soon to be spreading on that said planet. As the signal eventually spread all over the planet, those within the same area as it would experience all of those terrifying things such as paranoia, dementia, and so on, and would go on to commit atrocities throughout the many different populated areas, allowing them to be littered with tons of dead bodies. Some, however, would not be affected by this signal as their DNA was deemed more compatible with it. This was shown with two individuals, for example, such as Istvan Sato and Isaac Clarke, who experienced some hallucinations and driven a bit mad, however were not at the state where they would want to harm other individuals for no reason, or themselves at times. But that doesn't mean they are completely safe, however, as the marker would send them codes and blueprints of creating a marker directly into their brains and transforming them into vessels for the mysterious artifacts. Those who had lost their lives in the events prior would have their corpses moved towards the marker, where the signal would go on to trigger the next stage, the necromorph infestation. This contagion's genetic code would go on to be written in an alien language on the markers themselves, as the signal would go on to reanimate dead cells and tissue of all of the species around them within the marker's area of influence. With that all in motion, the dead bodies would be transformed in the most barbaric way into horrific stuff of nightmares. Huge monstrous creatures that are brought about for one simple reason, and that is to kill the remaining species living within the area, and having some of them going on to infect those who have not transformed themselves. This is not limited to just the black markers. This contagion will take effect with all markers that replicate the signal. So even if you are continents away from the original marker that crash landed on your planet, if there is a replica marker near you, the contagion will also hit your community as well, and will not be any easier for you to deal with. As the contagion spreads throughout the whole planet, the necromorph presence becomes more and more as they become the new dominant species. They will then move towards the marker in their masses as they wait for the next part of the process to go ahead, which would be the state of convergence. The black marker is considered the main way for the convergence to start. However, that is not to say that the red markers, the replica markers, can't do it. For the red markers to trigger this event, they would have to absorb its creators, and only after that could it trigger the event and complete the convergence. As this event goes ahead, several powerful energy bursts would be released, and after that, every single necromorph and dead body within the area would be pulled into the sky and stratosphere, along with fragments of the planet, and start to rotate and levitate them all, joining them all together and merging the necrotic flesh and rocky fragments to create the end product of the Brethren Moon. With the moon's creation, it would then go on to feed off of the remaining life on the planet to make sure everything is absorbed, and once it has, it will set off on its next goal, to take over all of the other worlds that the markers have affected and absorb the planets once again. And after a long, horrific process feeding off the many planets that were hit by the markers, the Brethren Moons would go into a form of hibernation and join all of the other moons to form into a chain network signal. It's safe to say that the markers are the most influential things in all of the universe. Whilst they might seem like just a beautiful sight at first, a somewhat magical entity that stands proud out within the land, what they can do is terrifying. And if it's ever found on your planet, it's almost guaranteed that your survival will plummet. And unless you are one of the most skilled individuals with some of the best armor, survival skills, and luck, where the signal doesn't really affect you too much, you will be a part part of this process and eventually will be turned into one of these brethren moons who will set off on a galactic journey, absorbing any and all planets that were unlucky enough to be hit by a black marker. With that said, there is one silver lining to their discovery, and that is thanks to their signal once again. With this signal, it is believed that they have helped advance technology and ideas, especially with humans, as is shown with Dr. Mercer on board the USG Ishimura, who with the help of the marker signal was able to learn of new surgical techniques as well as new technical designs that he could use on his patients. However, whilst this could help humanity further, of course he was fully indoctrinated by the signal and would go on to use it to help the necromorph contagion, creating the terrifying creature known as the Hunter, which would relentlessly chase down individuals, and if they were able to cut it down in its tracks, it would be able to regenerate any and all lost limbs, allowing it to come back from the dead to continue its hunt on any and all individuals within the area. So in the end, whilst the marker did provide vital information that could have been used to further humanity, it really was just to further the convergence event. But how did this knowledge come to light? How did we get to this stage where the USG Ishimura gets infected with the red marker on board and the higher-ups on the crew knowing full well of its existence? Well, luckily that information is out there, and the most worrying thing about that is the whole event has been going on for millions of years. Whilst I stated earlier in this video that it is unknown where these markers were created, it is very clear that the convergence events are not a new phenomenon, and in fact have been happening over the many millions of years to countless other civilizations throughout all of space. It is unknown what those species are, where they were located, the minute-by-minute events that happened, or when in time they happened. However, there were two documented events that happened that are seen as significant moments in the marker's history. The first was on Earth itself back 65 million years ago. During this event, as the dinosaurs were living over the planet, a meteor would go on to break through the Earth's atmosphere. This meteor would be grand in scale and would go on to hit the Gulf of Mexico, causing widespread destruction. The Earth would heat up to unlivable temperatures and all of the dinosaurs would be killed in the process. But this meteor was not just a lump of space rock. This meteor contained a black marker, and when it hit the Gulf of Mexico and caused the extinction of the dinosaurs, it would supposedly help trigger the evolution of mankind, helping them to develop into the advanced species it needed them to be, as it sat there waiting patiently. Millions of years passed as the black marker waited on the Earth's surface until the year of 2214, where it would finally kick into action, sending a signal out to the inhabitants of the Yucatan Peninsula within the Gulf of Mexico. This would hit a nearby research team led by Michael Altman, as he and the team would go on to discover this mysterious double helix obelisk within a flooded crater and would go on to recover it. It didn't take long after the team recovered it before the scientists would start developing dementia as well as madness, killing one another, believing them to be monsters, and providing the marker with dead bodies to start the next stage of the necromorph infestation. Altman was desperate to find a way out of this whole event, and during this, he would go on to learn that at some point within Earth's history, either through an outside force or through natural means, they had developed a mechanism within the human brain which was there to encourage humanity to reject the black marker's signal as well as its ultimate plans. But this defense mechanism did not work, as the black marker's influence was too powerful, as it was able to take over and manipulate the researcher's mind. But Altman wasn't done. He was not going to let this device take over his mind completely and turn him into one of those creatures. In a last-ditch effort to prevent what was going to become a convergence event, Altman would go on to replicate the black marker's construction blueprints, and instead of turning them into a red marker, he would go on to transmit them back to the marker itself, which would go on to appease it and cause it to ultimately fall silent for a while. After this, Altman knew the research facility could not continue on here and used the silence of the black marker to sink the facility, as well as the marker, back into the flooded crater. Doing so, it seemed like Altman would be safe from the effects of the black marker, and the convergence event would not be able to go ahead. However, after sinking the facility and the marker, two men working for the government would go on to assassinate Altman to recover his marker codes, and essentially silence him for good. But this mysterious death raised many questions among the wider population. They wanted to know what he was doing with the black marker and the research within the area. And because of all of this, it would make him a martyr and the main figurehead for a newly formed religion based around the mythical obelisks of the markers, and would name itself the Church of Unitology. Now in full access to the codes, the government had a simple plan, and that was to study the markers' effects and to try and use them as a source of limitless energy, as humanity was suffering greatly during this point thanks to massive overpopulation, causing many crises all over the world. With these codes now acquired, the sovereign colonies would go on to do what the black marker wanted in the first place, as they would go on to build 3 red markers which would be located on highly classified distant planets of Aspera, Kramer, and Aegis 7. But it quickly became apparent to them that this was a grave mistake, as the newly created red markers would go on to trigger the necromorph event all over the facilities, forcing the government to shut them all down and erasing any and all knowledge of the red markers that were located there. This meant killing their own kind just to silence them. The other event was found out in 2311 on the planet of Tau Volantis. A researcher known as Dr. Earl Serrano would go on to discover that on this planet over 2 million years ago, Tau Volantis was a large aquatic planet that was filled with life. Inhabiting it were sentient alien species who were fully evolved much like humans and had gone on to build themselves a rising civilization. But like with humanity, these aliens would also go on to find a black marker on their planet and realize that with this obelisk, they would extract limitless energy from it. This would trigger all of the same situations once again, as the aliens would go on to absolutely worship and adore this monument, and thanks to the black marker's signal, would go on to help creatures duplicate red markers and place them all over the planet to try and harvest its limitless power. But like many species before, the aliens were indeed tricked by the marker, as it would go on to send codes all over its copies and ultimately release the necromorph contagion, driving the aliens mad and creating bodies for the convergence event once again. Eventually, it was all over for the aliens. The convergence event was in full effect, and the planet of Tau Volantis was quickly turning into a necromorph moon through the many bodies and pieces of planets. However, the aliens were not going to let it take them, as some still survived and looked for a solution for stopping the event in its tracks. With this impending doom on the horizon, the aliens would go on to create a machine that would go on to freeze the planet and the moon, which would successfully stop the convergence in its tracks. On top of that, the machine also had another plan that was similar to what eventually caused Aegis 7's ultimate destruction. The plan was for the machine to bring down the moon, forcing it to crash into the planet itself and wiping everything out to stop the spread. All was going well, however, before this could go ahead, the alien species would sadly die out, and Tau Volantis would end up being a frozen wasteland with the original inhabitant non-existent, or turning into necromorphs that were killing people all over. The moon would be fully aware of the situation and would call out via the markers to make it whole and try and get them to turn it off, meaning the machine, so it could continue its convergence event. During that same time, Dr. Earl Serrano, who discovered what had happened on the planet millions of years ago, also discovered thousands of markers that the aliens had made, and with that discovery, yet another outbreak was brought upon the humans. Realizing that they were going to be doomed to a horrible fate, General Spencer Mahad issued Scenario 5, which would be to eliminate everything and everyone whilst on their mission. Dr. Earl Serrano, after discovering everything on that planet, would go on to send Tim Kaufman and Sam Ackerman to recover the device known as the Codex, a man-made device designed to stop the convergence event. But unfortunately, during this task, Tim, Sam, Mahad, and Serrano himself would meet their ends. By the 25th century, many humans did not know of what had happened out there within the other colonies regarding the markers. Unitology, however, was still on the rise, as markers were regarded as holy relics of the deities who had created them in the first place. Overpopulation, however, was still a huge problem, and many energy issues were still being had. This almost forced humanity into looking into traveling the stars once again, as they would go on to set up deep space mining operations, forming the Concordance Extraction Corporation operation, and the creation of their iconic mining ship known as the USG Ishimura. But whilst on one of its last missions to Aegis 7 to perform what was essentially illegal operations to recover the red marker housed there, the necromorph contagion would spread throughout the colony again, as well as the ship itself, driving the ship's crew mad and causing many to kill each other, as well as killing themselves and adding to the marker's numbers. It would be thanks to ex-ship engineer Isaac Clarke, who was on a voluntary rescue mission to save his girlfriend Nicole Brennan, who would go on to save humanity from total destruction, as he would destroy the colony of Aegis 7, dropping a whole continent on it to make sure the marker could not continue its convergence event. But the red marker prior to its destruction had in fact imprinted its blueprints into the engineer's brain and had left him scarred from the whole event that he had been a part of. After being knocked out by the vision of his dead girlfriend, Isaac would find himself within Titan Station along with the scientist who caused another necromorph outbreak on the USG O'Bannon. And with him here on the station, Isaac would be used to revive the marker program run by the Earth Gov to try and harvest more limitless energy. However, once again, the marker known as Site 12 marker on the station would cause another outbreak that would start to kill all housed within the area, almost taking Isaac multiple times, with the marker attempting to absorb him in the event. But luckily for him, once again, Isaac was able to escape the station with Ellie Langford, who was also not affected by the marker signal. And as they got out, they were just in time before the station and the marker were completely destroyed. Despite what looked like some victories for humanity thanks to Isaac Clarke, the markers were still ahead of them, as they had spread to almost all of the major colonies thanks to EarthGov and their replication program, as they desperately tried to get that limitless energy. One radical group of unitologists known as the Circle would see this as a violation and would go on to unleash the markers among the colonies and would continue to spread the necromorph's contagion to try and cause a universal convergence. Isaac, Ellie Langford and John Carver would go on to travel to the frozen planet of Tau Volantis and found Serrano's work and research about the aliens that once inhabited the planet. During this time, however, the moon had completed its convergence and time was almost up for all at Tau Volantis. However, with all of that research gathered from Serrano, Isaac and his team were able to finish the alien machine and would use it to kill the necromorph moon orbiting the planet. It was finally over and the marker signal was no more. But for Ellie, she would go on to watch all of this happen and believe that both Isaac and Carver were dead, killed to save the lives of many. Isaac and Carver did indeed survive the event, however, but their actions had major consequences as their destruction of the moon awoke all of its brothers, which formed together and came to Earth to consume all of its biomass lingering on the planet. What happens next? That is still to be found out. But for Earth, it once again looks like its time has come and the necromorphs and the markers will complete their goal for universal convergence. In the end, the markers are some of the most terrifying things to encounter. Whilst they might look spectacular dotted out on the landscape, the influence they have on the mind will turn you from a sane everyday being into a raving lunatic that will either kill everyone around you believing they're monsters or ending yourself. Or if you are strong enough to survive its signal, you will either be slaughtered by the bodies turned into necromorphs or be indoctrinated to do the marker's bidding. So were these markers creations of an advanced species that were desperately trying to solve their own population problems, but in the course of all of it, had the creation turn on them and wiped them out, triggering this whole conquest for universal convergence? Or were these just species that advanced themselves and got stronger over the millions and millions of years, growing grander in scale the more they took from others? Or are they just space bacteria that once again have evolved to become a major universal threat? You could speculate this question for years on end, but in the end, it doesn't really matter what they are, where they were made, or who made them, if anyone. If anyone was to encounter one of the markers, the chances of survival are extremely slim, and now with the whole of the necromorph moons descending on humanity, you best say your prayers that you will survive this event. But just don't make those prayers to the markers themselves, as they are the ones that want to turn you into these horrifying abominations. The future of humanity is extremely unsure now in the 26th century, with the moons looking like they are moments away from the Earth's destruction. It would most most likely be down to Isaac Clarke, Carver, and Ellie to save the day once again. However, will we ever see that story unfold? Only time will really tell. But for now, this has been the story behind the markers and what their overall goal is throughout the universe of Dead Space. I want to say a huge thank you for watching this video, and a huge thank you to my patrons for allowing me to make them on a regular basis, including my small fishes, my big fishes, Christopher, Last Persona User, Arto Krem, and Greg, my YouTube channel Wise Ones, Fiery Italian, Ico the Wolf, and Sith Lord 906, my Sharks, Wow Such Gaming, Jason X117, Breadbeard, and Rondacy, and my Megalodons, Sinus, Hazy Thoughts, and Chernobyl Stalker. But that is all for now. Thank you for watching again, and please do check out my other lore videos in the description below. There's many different playlists of many different games, so see what you fancy and give them a watch and a like. Use my G Fuel link and code WISEFISHYT for up to 30% off of your orders, and please do like, comment, and subscribe to help get these videos out there. And with all of that said, I shall see you all in the next one. Cheers.